Nazi International Part 2 by Berk Gumus September 26 2023.
Strange activities in Argentina.
President and Generalissimo Juan Domingo Peron was nothing if not intensely patriotic and flamboyant. His influence and effect on the development of Argentina as a regional power was lasting, and endures to such an extent that if one says South American dictators, many people to this day think first of Peron. Few people realize, however, the depth of his relationship with the post-war Nazis or the degree of cooperation and funding he gave them.
Juan Domingo Peron.
Dictator Juan Domingo Peron played a crucial role in ferrying Nazis to his country and giving them asylum. The ratlines would not have been successful without the involvement of a major Latin American government with the resources to harbor hundreds, if not thousands, of Nazis. Even Borman's plans for ongoing Nazi research could not have been accomplished without the help of the Argentine dictator. Whenever and for whatever reasons Peron first developed his sympathies for Nazism and the Third Reich, there can be no doubt that these crystallized when the young Peron, then an officer in the Argentine army, was sent on a tour of Europe in 1938. Sent to tour various European countries as a military observer, cultivated many contacts in fascist Italy and Germany. However, Peron was also present in Europe in 1942, receiving special military training in Mussolini's army. Peron was granted an audience with Pope Pius IV, Eugenio Pacelli, and met Argentine's special diplomatic envoy Juan Carlos Goyeneche, who had been sent on a special mission to Berlin by then Argentine President Castillo. Castillo's regime in Argentina began to court the Axis powers. The Axis powers Germany, Italy, Japan were opposed by the Allied powers led by Great Britain, the United States, and the Soviet Union. 5 other nations joined the Axis during World War II: Hungary, Romania, Bulgaria, Slovakia, and Croatia, and particularly Nazi Germany, during the Axis high tide of the summer of 1942, as Hitler's armies continued lunging deep, the Soviet Russia and Rommel's Africa Corps raced across the Libyan and Egyptian deserts. Castillo, a weak civilian president, walked a diplomatic tightrope, carefully maintaining a facade of neutrality, while his leading civilian and military advisers circumvented normal diplomatic channels and sought direct contact with Berlin. In this case, the normal diplomatic channels were circumvented by a special Argentine envoy, a young Catholic nationalist whose grandfather had once been president of Uruguay and whose father had been mayor of Buenos Aires prior to the Second World War. The envoy's name was Juan Carlos Goyeneche, and he was a close friend and confidential agent of Colonel Juan Domingo Peron. Additionally, Goyeneche had cultivated close contacts among the Foreign Intelligence Branch of the SS, which had a heavy human on-the-ground presence in Argentina prior to and during the war. This network of agents was connected to Berlin via an array of secret transmitters known as the Bolivar Network that covered much of the country. In 1942, Goyeneche departed for Europe via nationalist Spain, whence he travelled onward to fascist Italy. There, using Argentine diplomatic contacts in Spain, he was able to develop close ties to Giovanni Cardinal Montini, at that time working in the Vatican Secretariat of State. It should be noted that it was Montini who would eventually be elected Pope Paul VI and preside over the conclusion of the Second Vatican Council. In early January 1943, as the German military situation at Stalingrad was reaching its disastrous denouement, Goyeneche visited Heinrich Hueml at the latter's Eastern Front headquarters. The conversation was of a general nature, though Himmler asked Goyeneche to convey a favorable impression of the Reichsführer to Pius X on the latter's upcoming visit to Rome. From Berlin, Goyeneche returned once more to Madrid, where he lunched with Spain's foreign minister, Ramon Serrano Suna, discussing his impending visit to Pope Pius XIII and Benito Mussolini. The Argentine special envoy's purpose was to organize a conference of pro-Axis Catholic delegates from Vichy France, Hungary, Romania, Slovenia, Italy, Spain, and Portugal, who would meet in Rome to integrate the Christian order in the new order. Journeying on to Rome, Goyeneche met twice with Giovanni Cardinal Montini, and then with Pope Pius X, who urged Argentina to preserve its neutrality. The Pope went so far as to draft a message in support of Argentina's neutrality. After this, the special envoy met with Benito Mussolini, who communicated Fascist Italy's secret support for a coup. On June 4, 1943, all these maneuverings on the part of Peronist Goyeneche, the Axis, and the Vatican were finally rewarded when a group of colonels led by Peron finally overthrew Castillo, ejecting him from the presidential mansion, the Casa Rosada. However, it is worth noting the outlines of the post-war Nazi international that began to take shape during this time period when the military initiative passed irrevocably from the Axis to the Allies in the wake of the disaster at Stalingrad and the British victory at El Alamein in North Africa. As was seen above, the most likely initial purpose of Goyeneche's visit to Germany in 1942 to 1943 was to solicit German support for just such a coup, and further, to enter a secretive support with the Axis powers. Dissuaded in this course by Ribbentrop's diplomatic answers, Ulrich Friedrich Wilhelm Joachim von Ribbentrop was a German politician and diplomat who served as Minister of Foreign Affairs of Nazi Germany from 1938 to 1945. The next best thing was concluded: the installation of a pro-Axis neutral regime in Buenos Aires. The Argentine effort was fully complicit in the attempt to internationalize Nazism by linking to the various pro-Nazi factions in the various puppet governments of Europe, and this effort centered furthermore on tacit Vatican support. Once Peron's colonels were in power, moreover, secret collaboration began in earnest. A partnership with Argentina's military had already been formalized. As he told American interrogators after the war, SD Chief Walter Schellenberg had approved an agreement for mutual collaboration in May 1943. It included freedom from arrest for Nazi agents in Argentina, camouflage identification for them as members of the Argentine Secret Service, the use of the Argentine diplomatic pouch for transporting secret material between Buenos Aires and Berlin, and even an early warning system in case of a cabinet crisis that could endanger German agents. In return, Argentina's military were allowed access to the powerful radio communications network of the Nazi Secret Service, were provided with information culled from Nazi sources in Argentina's neighboring countries, and were promised collaboration in forming an Argentine-led South American bloc of nations, the creation of a third position between the two likely post-war power centers of the United States and the Soviet Union. Indeed, Juan Peron began discussing the idea of what he called third position between the far right's capitalism and the far left's communism with his future foreign minister as early as 1947. So committed to this vision was Peron that he and his intelligence chief Rodolfo Freude invited the pro-Nazi sympathizer and Belgian Rexist Day to meet with Peron personally after the latter had overtly assumed power in Argentina. Both Peron and Freude were impressed with Day's own attempts to cultivate such political views among his own contacts in Argentina and Europe, and were particularly interested in Day's group's objective of creating a movement to unite all those in the world who do not support either of the two formulas offered to the masses. Belgian Rexism was Belgium's equivalent of Croatia's Ustashi, Spain's Phalangists, Italy's Fascists, and of course, Germany's Nazis. It was one of the many exported versions of Nazism inculcated deliberately by the Nazis in their occupied territories in Europe. American democratic capitalism, which declares itself the champion of freedom and the defender of private property, and Bolshevik Russian communism, the destroyer of private capitalism, but also the destroyer of all individual freedom. Direct German support for Peron came after the war's end. In 1945-46, when Rodolfo Freude's father, Ludwig, a long-time personal friend of Peron with proven Nazi links, had channeled large contributions from Argentina's German business community into Peron's 1945 to 1946 presidential campaign, seeming to confirm the rumors that the colonel was in the pay of the Nazis. An American counterintelligence report from the period stated that Rodolfo Freude was financing Nazi resistance throughout the world. Moreover, rumors circulated that Hitler's deputy Martin Bormann was in hiding in Argentina and working with Freude. So close was the relationship between Peron and his spy master Freud that, when a momentary coup against Peron's puppet, Edelmiro Farrell, landed Vice President Peron in jail, it was Rodolfo Freud and a convenient uprising of Peron supporters that toppled the coup and propelled Peron to his 1946 election victory.
Rodolfo Freud is second from left with Peron.
Once in full power, Peron established 3 separate routes for his ratlines: the northern route via Denmark, Sweden, and Norway, the Swiss route through Switzerland, and the southern route via ships departed from Genoa, Italy, with Vatican diplomatic passports and false identities provided by the Archbishop of Genoa, Giuseppe Cardinal Siri. Peron's own objective in creating these ratlines was to recruit technicians for his ambitious program of aeronautics and the development of modern jet fighters for Argentina's Air Force. Indeed, some of his first recruits were pro-Nazi French jet designer Émile de Voitin and Germany's equally capable Kurt Tank, an engineer for Focke-Wulf. Hovering over all this activity is, of course, the shadow of Martin Bormann and the possibility that he did escape, along with his plunder, from Europe. There is also evidence that this in fact occurred, and it comes from a rare post-war document of Argentina's Central de Intelligence. It is a bank account statement of a joint account held by Peron and Bormann, listed by national currencies.
Bormann's and Peron's joint bank account statement.
What Bormann and Peron did with all this money, and several kilograms of gold, platinum and diamonds, can be seen in Peron's hasty proclamation in 1951 that Argentina had learned to control thermonuclear fusion by alerting the world press to its secret project in Hueml under the direction of Nazi physicist Ronald Richter. The Generalissimo, it seemed, was after the power of the stars and of hydrogen bombs, the first of which would be detonated in the Pacific a little over a year after Peron's announcement. If so, then Dr. Richter had succeeded in a matter of a few weeks of moving to Argentina from regional power to the first thermonuclear power in the world. As soon as Peron and Richter made the announcement, it was being denounced in the United States by heavy hitters from its Atomic Energy Commission. Shortly thereafter, Dr. Richter and his team retracted the announcement by exposing themselves and claiming that their experiments did not go as claimed by intentionally calling attention to misplaced scientific equipment in his experiments. Richter was most likely following instructions from elsewhere to shut the project down by any means possible. Richter was involved in something entirely different, something extremely sensitive. Then Peron's announcement to the Argentine press could only have drawn attention to something that others did not wish known, and the only way to deflect that attention would be to have the whole thing declared a fraud. These instructions came in the form of the visit to Argentina of the Dutch scientist Professor Cornelius Jan Bakker. Professor Cornelius Jan Bakker, leading Dutch nuclear physicist, arrived at Hueml Island under a dense cloak of secrecy. He was apparently brought in as a result of recent talks between Peron and the Netherlands' goodwill ambassador, Prince Bernhard. Prince Bernhard of the Netherlands is perhaps best known for his role in the founding of the so-called Bilderberg Group, as mentioned briefly in Nazi International Part 1. But there is a much more sinister side to Prince Bernhard. Bernhard was a former member of the Nazi SS and an employee of Germany's IG Farben in Paris. In 1937, he married Princess Juliana of the Netherlands and became a major shareholder and officer in Dutch Shell Oil, along with Britain's Lord Victor Rothschild. Many have written about the conspiratorial aspects of the shadowy Bilderberg Group, but few have noticed the ominous implications of its premier founder, Prince Bernhard himself. As a native of Germany and a member of the SS and employee of the notoriously powerful German chemical cartel, IG Farben, it is possible that the post-war founding of the Bilderberg Group is but another piece of the puzzle of post-war Nazi survival and the plans of the Nazi International. Succinctly, it is possible that the Bilderberg Group was created, in part, in order for the post-war Nazi International to monitor, penetrate, and influence the plans and machinations of one of their chief rivals for power, international corporatists and globalists. In other words, with Prince Bernhard's IG Farben connection, we have a tenuous connection between Richter's Bariloche fusion project and the wartime atomic research of Nazi Germany. With these revelations, Peron's consultation of a Dutch nuclear physicist assumes its ominous aspect. For having received a blunt denial of Richter's claims from his own scientists, Peron is appealing to a former Nazi, Prince Bernhard, for an audit of Richter's notebooks and claims. It is perhaps quite significant that it is after this audit that the project is supposedly shut down, for nothing appears to be forthcoming in the record about what Professor Bakker found, nor what he reported to Peron or Prince Bernhard. After that, the US Air Force would continue to collect and quietly evaluate as much data on Richter and his work as it could. When Richter shared some of his experimental results with dictator Peron, however, the project security was very nearly blown. For Peron's response, his infamous press conference of 1951, was hardly anticipated by Richter or his hidden Nazi masters, one of whom was most likely Martin Bormann himself. With world attention focused on Argentina, on Dr. Richter and on the Hueml project, the decision was taken to discredit Richter and the whole enterprise publicly. And Richter and his team were given their orders that scripted their carefully anomalous behavior that guaranteed the project's demise. Richter was doing specific research in 1943 for the Allgemeine Elektrizitätsgesellschaft, or AEG, in Berlin, the German firm that built the power plant for the Nazi Bell device. So one can imagine what Dr. Richter was really working on.
Details of the Nazi Bell.
In August of 1997, Polish journalist, military historian, researcher, and author Igor Witkowski claims to have been shown classified prisoner interrogation transcripts of German SS General Jakob Sporenberg by a Polish intelligence agent. What Witkowski discovered seemed to be official evacuation protocols for a secret Nazi research project concerning a device named Die Glocke, which he referred to as the Nazi Bell. given the highest top-secret classification by the German W3 military of Kriegentscheidend, or War Decisive. In the book The Truth About the Wunderwaffe by Igor Witkowski, published in 2013, he writes that the bell, in the initial period of development at the AAEG in Berlin, only hovered above the ground and just rose and fell without being able to perform any maneuvers. He states that the bell glows with a sort of pale bluish glow and made a buzzing sound, which is why it was nicknamed Der Bienenstock, the beehive. It is further said that the bell was connected by electrical cables to installations on the ground. The device allegedly worked with counter-rotating magnetic fields and a substance called Serum 525, a cherry-red, viscous substance, possibly enriched mercury. Witkowski points out that the genius of the Nazi scientists was that they constructed a plasma trap that caused the plasma to rotate. An ordinary plasma trap does not do that. He concludes that the scientists made the plasma rotate in a plasma trap because they were involved in some kind of torsion physics. And the first thing Dr. Richter said he did in his Hueml thermonuclear fusion experiment for Peron was that he worked with rotating plasma. And he did it in such a way that he pulsed the plasma with surges of electricity. The original Bell project of the AEG and Richter's own theoretical rationalizations of the Hueml project both happen to refer to hyperdimensional physics, the unified field theory, zero-point energy, high-spin, high-turbulence plasma shock waves, electrical pulsing, and rotating plasma. And taken into consideration along with Borman's suspicious presence in the very same region, then the conclusion seems all but certain. The post-war Nazi International was continuing the development of the very technologies that gave them control of the energies of the very fabric and structure of space-time itself. Energies and technologies that would alter the very structure of world finance, geopolitics, technologies that held such horrendous weaponization potential that it would make an H-bomb look like a firecracker, and they weren't about to let anyone else have it.
Ronald Richter left, with Juan Domingo Peron right.
Wikipedia information.
The Hueml project was an early 1950s Argentine effort to develop a fusion power device known as the thermotron. The concept was invented by Austrian scientist Ronald Richter, who claimed to have a design that would produce effectively unlimited power.
511th Contact Sunday, 25th of December, 2010, 1304 HRs.
This also involved Nazi engineers who were acquitted of their Nazi past in the USA and became American citizens. These, like the Nazi engineers who had fled to South America, also continued to work on the development of disc bell and balloon-shaped flying apparatus, which were airworthy and with which extensive test flights were carried out.
A strange presence in Bariloche.
A glance around the environs of Bariloche, Argentina will show just how heavy the German influence there was and is, for the architecture is distinctly German, from the houses to the hotels, etc. There is even, in this remote, rugged and beautiful place in Argentina, a German cultural center.
German-style houses in Bariloche. German public architecture in Bariloche.
One of the biggest mysteries in Rio Negro province, however, was a large hotel, discovered by Shark Hunters founder Harry Cooper. Shark Hunters was an international group of veterans of the submarine services of World War II, and in particular was dedicated to detailing the history of the U-boot Waffe of the German Kriegsmarine. While on a visit to the Rio Negro province, Cooper found this large hotel of distinctly German architecture in a town so small that its mere presence is enough to raise eyebrows. The hotel was far away from anything. It was built before and during the war. Cooper discovered that the hotel was the scene of gatherings of German veterans on April 20th every year, Adolf Hitler's birthday. More importantly, according to people Cooper interviewed, General Eisenhower even visited the hotel sometime during or around 1954. But that's not all, for according to the people interviewed by Cooper, the motel was originally built as a large plastic surgery clinic.
The lobby of the plastic surgery clinic cum hotel in the area of Bariloche.
If all this be true, then one is able to conclude that the Bariloche area had become the new Vatican for post-war Nazis fleeing Europe, the headquarters of their covert projects, from providing new identities and faces to its clients to conducting some very advanced scientific research. Adding considerable weight to the idea that the environs of Bariloche had become something of a headquarters for the post-war Nazi International, and to the idea that Richter's Hueml fusion project comprised something more than just an effort to control fusion, and that something else may have been going on in addition to that something cleverly suggested, and just as cleverly disguised by Richter's theoretical explanations. In terms of the actual physics being investigated is the alleged presence in Bariloche province after the project was shut down of none other than the Nazi Party Reichsleiter and the de facto leader of the post-war Nazi International, Martin Bormann. Paul Manning, a journalist and longtime associate and friend of the famous CBS newsman Ed Morrow, mentioned Bormann's presence in Bariloche province, but did not connect his appearance with the Richter fusion project. Manning begins by noting that President Truman himself became involved in the hunt for Bormann in 1948, 3 long years after Bormann supposedly died trying to escape Berlin. According to the official Standard history, on June 16, 1948, President Truman became involved in the hunt for Martin Bormann. Robert H. Jackson, who had once taken a leave from the Supreme Court to serve as U.S. Chief Prosecutor at the Nuremberg trials, wrote to the President that a quiet search should be made by the FBI for Bormann in South America. My suggestion, therefore, he wrote, is that the FBI be authorized to pursue thoroughly discreet inquiries of a preliminary nature in South America. I have submitted this summary to Mr. Hoover, and am authorized to say that it meets with his approval. You may inform him of your wishes directly or through me, as you prefer. The choice of the FBI to do the investigation is perhaps significant. Under American federal law, after Truman signed the National Security Act of 1947 that created the CIA and NSA, the FBI was restricted to intelligence operations on American soil. All operations on foreign soil fell under the jurisdiction of the CIA. So why would Jackson have urged President Truman to undertake an investigation in South America through the FBI? After all, Truman himself signed the law into existence and knew full well its contents. The answer lies once again in the fact that the CIA, which under Zurich OSS Station Chief Alan Dulles during the war, had negotiated a highly secret deal with the head of German military intelligence on the Eastern Front, General Reinhard Gehlen, to turn over, lock, stock, and Nazi Gehlen's entire network to the nominal oversight of the American intelligence community, leaving Gehlen in charge of its actual day-to-day operations. In other words, before the ink was even dry on the National Security Act of 1947, the CIA's civilian character had already been compromised in the most egregious way, since its entire operational desk in Eastern Europe and the Soviet Union, and to a great extent elsewhere as well, was staffed by a network of Nazis. Needless to say, then the CIA would not be the best instrumentality to investigate Borman's possible presence in Latin America. Jackson's request also suggests something even darker, that both he and Truman knew of the extent of Nazi penetration of the CIA, and therefore of its untrustworthiness as an investigative agency for post-war Nazi activity. In any case, as Manning observes, the presidential authorization was given, and John Edgar Hoover assigned the investigation to his most experienced and skillful agent in South America, who proved that he was just that by eventually obtaining copies of the Martin Borman file that were being held under strict secrecy by Argentina's Minister of the Interior in the Central de Inteligencia. When the file was received at FBI headquarters, it revealed that the Reichsleiter had indeed been tracked for years. One report covered his whereabouts from 1948 to 1961 in Argentina, Paraguay, Brazil, and Chile. The file revealed that he had been banking under his own name from his office in Germany in Deutsche Bank of Buenos Aires since 1941, that he held one joint account with the Argentinian dictator Juan Peron, and on August 4th, 5 and 14, 1967, had written checks on demand accounts in First National City Bank Overseas Division of New York, the Chase Manhattan Bank, and manufacturers Hanover Trust Co., all cleared through Deutsche Bank of Buenos Aires. Borman's wartime contact with Deutsche Bank bigwig Dr. Hermann Apps and the connections to the international financial interests of Morgan and Rockefeller via their big New York banks was paying big dividends. For Borman, quite apparently, did not even have to hide his identity, but could sign and cash checks under his own name through some of the largest and most well-known banks in America as late as 1967. But what Nazi activities were left for Borman himself to coordinate in Bariloche? When the only known Nazi activities ever centered, there were precisely Dr. Richter's controlled fusion project for Peron, and since Peron had long since ostensibly closed the project down. Borman did much more, however, than merely visit Bariloche after the Hueml Richter affair. It was, until Peron's ouster from power in 1955, his headquarters. For as Manning notes, he had moved to a 5,000-acre cattle and sheep ranch about 60 miles south of San Carlos de Bariloche, where he remained until Peron was overthrown. Borman had bunkered down. In other words, very close to the center of an ongoing post-war Nazi atomic research project of some unknown nature, and that fact highlights the possibility that the project was extremely important and sensitive to the post-war Nazi international, and that it required a source and amounts of funding other than Peron, which only Borman could provide. In other words, Dr. Richter's Hueml fusion project was most likely an extension and continuation of some aspects of the Bell project, Nazi Germany's most highly classified secret research project.
Things to know.
50th Contact Tuesday, 6th April 1976, 0137 HRS.
It was one of those groups that got their hands on plans by which they were able to produce beamship-like flying objects.
You are referring to the German flying saucers.
Certainly. However, their ships are still quite primitive and not space-capable. So they are still Earthbound, but here they have all kinds of possibilities. These Earth humans are also one of those groups that approach Earth humans and claim that they come from the stars with their saucer-shaped flying objects and are extraterrestrials. But this group is no longer in Europe, but like other groups in the South American region.
Pay attention to that was said in the 50th Contact report shown above. These Earth humans, the Nazis that escaped to SA, are also one of those groups that approach Earth humans and claim that they come from the stars with their saucer-shaped flying objects and are extraterrestrials. As, for example, the case of Reinhold O. Schmidt.
Wikipedia information.
According to Schmidt, On November 5, 1957, while driving through a rural area near Kearney, Nebraska, he saw a large blimp-shaped object on the ground in a field. He claimed 2 men left the object and escorted him inside it. On board witnessed a group of 4 men and 2 women speaking a language he described as High German. The group claimed to be from the planet Venus. After a conversation lasting about 30 minutes, Schmidt left the craft and it took off into the air, revealing large propellers at each end.
Reinhold O. Schmidt from a 1957 interview, and a sketch based on his description of the alleged UFO.
See also the Kecksburg UFO incident and the similarities to the Nazi Bell A model depicting the alleged crashed object and put on display near the Kecksburg fire station.
Source: Nazi International, the Nazis' post-war plan to control finance, conflict, physics, and space, by author Joseph P. Farrell, published in 2009. The Truth About the Wunderwaffe by Igor Witkowski, published in 2013. Guest author.